what is heaven? Now, from a conceptual standpoint, and like separating what people think it is or what they've been told or whatever, like basically the myths behind it or what people add to it to make it whatever it seems to be, it's really, I'm here to kind of strip away that and show you what lies beneath the cognitive machinery that is what you're observing. Now, you might be like, okay, well, what the heck does that mean? What are you doing? How are you doing it? Well, let's first start off with the basics. When somebody dies, quote unquote, when they die, do you like immediately forget that they ever existed? Because they no longer exist, right? Well, how can be the fact that someone dies and you still know they exist? Or have existed, or something like that. Now, it is arguable to say that that existence within your head is not truly them. We're not getting into that, understanding here, because that's a whole discussion in of itself. But there is some sort of data that's recorded in you of them, or some type of representation of them. And this data, even though their physical form has died, their vessel is no longer functioning, their computer is no longer on, yet that data is still stored in other places, which allows those other places to remember that, computer once existed. It's not like a terribly complex concept there, but it shows you that just because somebody dies doesn't mean that information of them stops existing. It actually continues forward because the information is stored in different areas. So when you think about it, just like the internet is a bunch of different computers and like servers or whatever, which is just computers, connected together, and they store data at different points and everything else. And they even call it from different points, and it goes really quick because, it's electrical communications. Humans are the same thing. But once again, just take the internet and slow it down really slow to the speed of communications, as in verbal, and other forms, such as written, and these other ways that these computers communicate. So, when you get to the understanding of what heaven is, a word I like to describe it is a cognitive facility. If you want to be like, sciencey on it. But basically, that's like a really good encapsulating way to see what it is. You can also call it like a holy matrix, a spirit network. It's something that connects all these different spirits together, and thus this cognitive facility, the spirit matrix, holy matrix, whatever, is just a bunch of spirits linked together, forming a spiritual network. This is a heaven. Now, within that heaven, it's not like you have multiple existences within this space. You have, the individual's actual existence and then the individual's existence within others, which is not exactly their existence, but it's like a replication of their existence. Kind of like an emulation of them. It's not them, but it is a simulacrum of them, which allows that image or whatever information to continue forward even if the original computer source, shuts off. And that's why, when it comes to heaven, your existence in heaven is not an existence of that computer still running. It's not, when your computer turns off, it's off. However, the information on that computer can exist within the spiritual network and still bounce around and still exist. And this is what is known as an afterlife, a non-existence of the individual, but their continued existence of their information. And thus, when we get into the idea of entering heaven or things of that nature, now, I'm not saying the idea that heaven is solely for an afterlife. This is a concept that's relatively strange when people bring it up. They're like, heaven is an afterlife. No, not really, but it's like, because we'll talk about how people journey to like the seventh heaven or the third heaven or whatever, and they'll say paradise or something like that, but they're still alive when they did it. Wait a minute, I thought heaven was supposed to be an afterlife. That's why it's when you get that misconception going on and perpetuated by certain individuals, it's very annoying when you try to explain these things, because you try to tell people like heaven is a cognitive facility which you can enter. So when somebody says to you, oh, a wealthy man or a rich man has a harder time getting into heaven than a camel passing through the eye of a needle, they're not talking necessarily about, and this is like say interpretation wise, understanding these statements and removing the religious context that was added to it, to show you what the actual statement means. When you talk about this, you're not talking about when you die, you don't get to go to a special magic happy place. Heaven is not referring to that. What this is referring to is the inability of a wealthy man. Well, what is a wealthy man? A wealthy man is someone who has lots of material possessions. So they're very attached to material things, the material world. Not to be confused with the greater divine reality. This is more of an inability to remove oneself and actually travel spiritually into that spirit network. In other words, like your computer just can't connect because you're too attached to these material possessions or things. You can't detach yourself from those. So as you travel in or try to travel or, let's say, connect, go online, to the spiritual network that is heaven, it just doesn't happen. You're too grounded in the material possessions. You cannot let go. So that's why when we say a wealthy man has a harder time entering heaven than a camel passing through the eye of a needle, we're showing you that when you are incredibly controlled by your material possessions, you just can't enter heaven. And you will be ruled and controlled by said material possessions and other things. You'll be more closer to that of the beast than that of those who can enter the kingdom of heaven. And this is that understanding of and when I talk about this is not talking about a heaven ruled by a deity. We're talking about what heaven actually is. And that's why when going over this, you can ask a really interesting question. That is, which came first, heaven or, a deity? Understanding that difference, it's kind of like making a chicken or the egg argument, but this is more understanding that heaven can exist without a deity. You can have a human spiritual network without having centralization. It's a very loose definition of a deity. Giving a much more descriptive definition of what a deity is, that's for another discussion, because you get into a lot of in-depth principles and things of that nature, and it requires some unpacking because once again people are very used to what they're taught. However, back to the point that heaven can exist without a deity. So that statement that a man who is wealthy does not have the same ability to enter heaven due to their connection to their material possessions and or desire for them. In other words, their inability to detach themselves from it. So when someone says, hey, you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, throw away your material possessions. I'm not saying that you should literally throw them away, but in a spiritual sense, you have to be able to detach from them to enter heaven. And this is one of those things that some people have a very hard time doing. So if they say, well, how do I enter heaven? Well, first you got to detach from the importance of material possessions before you can really enter heaven. And like I say, people have a hard time with that. And that's why when it comes to understanding that's why heaven doesn't have to have a deity or something to exist, that you can enter this kingdom that is, a cognitive facility, something that is shared among a spiritual network. And you can have separate spiritual networks, and those spiritual networks also have other functions to them, as in they have to be maintained. And this is the role of the priest class, or effectively shamans, is that it's the maintenance of and planning to improvements and everything to this cognitive facility. Just think about priests or shamans, which interchangeable terms, as those who are facility managers. They're the ones who they replace the light bulbs in heaven. They're the ones who keep it clean. They're the ones who set up the next cool thing that happens in heaven. They're the event planners. They run all of these spiritual facility manager roles. And that's why when it comes to cleaning up the place and, trying to get people to understand what it was truly about, it's once again falls upon the priest class to do so.